It's not even that I really liked the effect of it, but just the community of it, the giggling, and the fact that I actually felt like I was a part of something for the first time.
A sense of belonging. At 15, it meant everything. By the time high school was over, Vanessa Markov and her friends were smoking pot every day.
As a kid, I absolutely didn't think it was addictive because no one had ever talked about it being addictive.
15 years later, she found herself in a doctor's office pleading for help with multiple mental health issues.
I just started to have extreme panic attacks and very high anxiety, brutal social anxiety, to the point where I had to be either drunk or high in order to really relate to people or feel comfortable in my own skin.
When she tried to cut back on cannabis, that's when Markov realized she couldn't do it. Contrary to popular belief, it's estimated 9% of cannabis users will develop an addiction or dependency, which is less than alcohol and nicotine. But for those who start toking as teenagers, it's about 17%. And while they may think pot eases their stress and anxiety, think again.
These are people at risk for psychosis.
Regular cannabis use can rewire the brain, which is still developing until the age of 25. Near daily use has been associated with a higher risk of suicide, depression, and anxiety disorders.
We understand little about everything. We do understand enough to say that young people should not use cannabis.
Researchers still have a lot of questions, but they found for some, and they're not sure how many, marijuana increases the risk of developing mental illness, including psychosis and schizophrenia.
I would love to go to a party and tell, yes, you can use, no, you can't, yes, you can, no, you can't. We are not there yet. We don't know who can use and will have no trouble, versus some people, some very young people who are actually going to become very sick.
For Canadians young and old, frequent users or not, driving while stoned is also a serious concern. In the long and short term, marijuana can harm memory, concentration, and decision-making skills. Driving high doubles the risk of being in a collision, and yet
we're learning that there's a lot of misperceptions about drug-impaired driving, and a lot of Canadians feel that they are better drivers when they're under the influence of cannabis.
A recent Health Canada survey found students don't think smoking cannabis is as risky as they once did. In 2014, 25% of students said smoking cannabis once in a while was a great risk. 2 years later, it was down to 17%.
As a society, we need to become better educated about what the effects of cannabis are. And I think if you have that knowledge, it's going to be less daunting to have these conversations with young people.
Markov admits she probably wouldn't have listened to anyone's advice, but she regrets spending more than a decade of her life in a drug-induced haze.
I was extremely lethargic. I went from being an athlete to being a couch potato.
It took her 6 months to break her cannabis habit, but 3 years later, she welcomes legalization.
I'm totally for it because I think it's time for people to stop arguing over whether users are criminals and start looking at the resources and the help for people who do have a problem with it.
Markov has learned the hard way. For her, marijuana isn't a harmless cure-all. She hopes others can avoid making the same mistakes. Christine Birak, CBC News, Toronto.